And, I really appreciate this opportunity. I think that after listening to all the presentations this morning, this we've learned a lot, and this presentation sits right in the middle of some of the things that we've looked at. I work on this. This is actually work from a paper that we did with one of my students, and we're going to extract a bit from it, the generations, learning from generations in that. I come from a university that has a very different composition of students. And I think that was what gave us the opportunity to look at some of these things. We're going to look at the introduction, the study itself, and some of the research findings and contributions to practice and contributions to research and the sort of the limitations. The paper that I'm talking about is the paper that's shown there, published in one of the Elsevier journals from Helion. I did it with one of the students, Dodoo, and myself, and he's the person who runs most of the simulation part. We have a course that they use the simulation course and all that. In the school, we use that in the graduate marketing courses, that the strategic marketing, and also undergraduate courses. And in this particular study, we did that with the undergraduate courses, and we used actually the introduction to business and then strategy model for this particular study. But it was a course called the business simulation course that they have in the third year. That's it. So basically, for this, generally, what is prompted the introduction for it, the emergence of the use of entrepreneurship education generally, because we are looking at entrepreneurship as solutions for unemployment globally. And then also the increased gamification of courses in entrepreneurship programs. This is one of the issues that we look at. And also the other thing, the phenomenon of the emerging streams of these things, the multi-generation in the same cohort, different generations in the same cohort, since their learning styles are completely sort of different, and wanted to understand the dynamics of some of these things. Before that, in my area I've looked at marketing, consumer behavior, looking at some of the non-traditional areas of how students look at consumer education and that sort of thing. And the research gap in that paper was looking at the application of the knowledge, and then the sparse research on the phenomenon that we just discussed, and also the use of behavior resource models in looking at some of these things. Because most of the looking at the IT, we're looking at the adoption and the using of term, acceptance, and all that. But then how they behave in the students behave in the use of some of these things, and the satisfaction models and all that are areas that are of interest to us. So generally, in the study, we looked at the various generations. Generally, we looked at generation X. I mean, the latchkey generation, they grew up with computers, but did not encounter it in the classroom. And also we have the Y, the generation when they generally connect with computers, they're early users of social media. And then we have the net citizens, basically the internet generation, the generation Z. And the issue is that if you put all of these groups in the same cohort, how would they function, and how do they function? So generally, the research question, that's the second research question. The other one was to develop the model and validate a model, a behavioral resource model that can be used to test these things. And then the second one was to look at the differences of which we are going to talk about. So the methodology generally for it was, we used the third year student group that played the market-based simulation model as we did. Played 6 rounds. They had the first 2 years of that, but they do it for the whole semester as a course, basically. So they do some practice actually before they actually start playing, and then get it. And they have a facilitator to support. In that case, my assistant was the person supporting some of them, and then also one other professor who was also in charge of looking at them in that way. And then we had a cohort, the whole number of 392 of that, and then course, the instrument we used for the study was actually administered as a feedback model at the end. It was tested, and then we had the ethical approvals and all that to do. Then as part of the study, we got 316 responses from that. We tested the model using all these other application, PLS, for the validation of the model itself, and then comparing that we use one-way ANOVAs and all that. But then look at the interesting part of it is some of the cohort is their work experience, how many years they've been working, and also the current work status and all that. That's sort of we had some of them we also had owner managers, we had senior level managers, all in the same cohort. That's the thing, and that is what is of interest to that. So this is the research model that we use. Is a behavior results model that was generated. You can read more on that on the paper. We use the main thing of the student engagement, which has been aggregated into 8 components of student cognitive engagement, student behavioral engagement, and student emotional engagement. And I heard that people encouraging people to look at students to look at some of the or to engage with the system, getting discouraged from other presentations. That's it. We looked at student grades, and we looked at the user characteristics of the student, and also the resource demonstrability of the system that is being used, in this case, the marketplace system, for them to engage with the system, understand the system, and then be happy with the system. And that leads to entrepreneurial, as an entrepreneurship education course, leads to entrepreneurial intention, and also we measured it from the entrepreneurial orientation, individual entrepreneurial orientation, rather than the classic examination of certain and writing an exam. That's a sort of thing that we are looking at. So these are the variables in the model, and from where we got it from, the various definitions from that. Entrepreneurial intention, the psychological state of focusing on the orientation, the growth, and then that sort of thing in there. The mindset, changing of the mindset, which the individual promotes flexibility, creativity, innovation, and other things to do. Then the perseverance, effort, and all that they have to endure to use to be able to understand it. The resource demonstrability. We looked at the various components of the engagement, the cognitive engagement, the efforts in understanding what is being taught, the quality of the effort of the student to make perform well and achieve a desired result. That is generally the engagement, but then that's the component of it. Then we have the behavioral engagement, which includes the necessary to academic success, things that they did to participate, attendance, and all that we looked at. And also the emotional engagement. People have to, their feelings have to be heard. Sometimes they get the result and they are virtually the respondent, because they're actually emotional about it, but that is real life, and this is what we also wanted to capture with the student emotional engagement, and then enjoyment and boredom, frustration of that. So from this study, when we looked at it, we used the model, and then we used the instrument to look at the feedback from them, and some of the things that we got from it in the ANOVAs, the one-way ANOVAs. In research demonstrability, yes, there were significant differences from the 3 generations. The only ones that were not significant was the user characteristics, and also with the behavioral engagement. That's the portions of the model. That is it. And we take them one by one to look at the differences that we had. Okay. With resource demonstrability, yes, there was statistical differences in the generation Z, and then compared to generation Y, and then generation X. Okay. However, there was no difference between generation Y and generation Z. Therefore, from what we looked at, the generation X and generation Y have more appreciation of the resource demonstrability of the platform that is being used than the generation Z, because they take it as there are no differences in the appreciation of resource demonstrability of the platform between generation X and generation Y. For student grade, that is yes. Generally, in the use of the model, the platform, okay, generation X generally exhibited more grit in the form of perseverance and effort and consistency than generation Z. And there were no differences between generation Y and then the other generations, which was that's how they looked at it from it. From the user characteristics, generally we realized that there were no statistical differences across all the generations. But that, if you look at it, then it shows that it may have been conditioned by intergenerational differences. And it also makes us know that there's a classic difference between the student user characteristics and the generational characteristics, because they have some generational characteristics, but they can learn some of the other requirements to be able to have the knowledge to participate in the system, but that generally affect them in their generational cohort. That it's then with cognitive engagement. Okay, the toolkit has showed the statistical significance for Generation Z and compared to Generation Y, and the result from other comparisons of Generation did not reach statistical significance. Therefore, Generation X students generally exhibited more cognitive engagement than Generation Z students. However, comparisons with Y and other generations were there. So there was stark difference between how the Generation X people use cognitively engage with the system as compared to Generation Z, the people, students. Emotionally, yes, Generation X students were found to generally exhibit higher emotional engagement from Generation X compared to Generation Z. However, a comparison of Y with other generations did not show any marked difference in the emotional thing. So there were differences between X and with behavioral, there were no differences across board. Generally, it does not differ across the generations in the multi-generational cohort for gamified entrepreneurial courses, and could have been conditions by intergenerational factors. That is, they learn as students, but it is the way you have to behave. Basically, that's it. But then generationally, it wasn't significant when we looked at that particular part of the study in the study. And with entrepreneurial intention, Generation Y generally exhibited a higher entrepreneurial intention compared to Generation Z when using the platform. Also, Generation X generally exhibited a higher entrepreneurial intention compared to Z when using the platform. There was a difference between the generation of entrepreneurial intention for Y and then for X. And for the orientation, the results show differences in entrepreneurial orientation between X and Y. And this is actually documented that there's there's a difference in entrepreneurial orientation. It's in the literature and all that. And also there were no marked differences in comparison with Y. So Y just kind of sits in between all that, but then the X and the Y generally different. Therefore, using the marketplace simulation platform and the research model, yes. We had positive student entrepreneurial intention as an antecedent to student orientation, and it was validated in the system, in the model that we had, and also the students' behavioral engagement resulting in higher entrepreneurial intention than students' cognitive intention. Also, student emotional engagement does not necessarily influence students' entrepreneurial intention. So that if the students are becoming more emotional about it, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are actually engaging or learning. Basically, we have to look at ways to contextualize that and help them out of that. And then with engagement factors, such as the students' grades, positively influence student engagement in the order of the student environment, the behavioral engagement, the student cognitive engagement, and then the student emotional engagement. That is the order in which student grade affects them, as compared to the students. The most influential factor is the grades. That is the ability to, in the engagement factor, compared to results, demonstrability of the system, and then the user characteristics that had been defined earlier on. That student grade is an important student engagement facilitator in the gamified entrepreneurial course for multi-generational cohorts of Generation X and Y, and also have the results demonstrability factor influencing emotional engagement more than the cognitive, but does not influence student behavior. And also the student user characteristics positively influence student engagement in the order of student behavior, the behavioral engagement, and then the emotional rather than the cognitive. Therefore, student user characteristics influence all three forms of student engagement and are the third influential engagement facilitator in the gamified entrepreneurial cohort. In multi-generational cohorts in the gamified entrepreneurial course, the behavioral engagement does not differ across generations in the entrepreneurial course. And when we looked at the generation X, Z, and X in the multi-generational cohorts of gamified entrepreneurial courses, they utilize cognitive engagement differently. So X and Y, they use cognitive engagement differently. And then we have Z, utilizes entrepreneurial intention differently from X and Y. That is it. And there are no differences between X and Y, but when it comes to Z, Z stands on its own. That's the generation. And the generation Z has a different orientation, as we have said earlier on, as compared to X or that. And understanding this cohorts in gamified entrepreneurial courses in higher education, we found that the factors, the resource demonstrability of the system and the student grade and all that, as these are selective, they have to be contextualized, as these have selective effects on students' cognition and behavioral engagement in the multi-generational cohort. They are in the same class, but each of them is looking at the system from a different perspective, and then has been some engaging differently from the system. So for contribution to practice, we're looking at for student engagement, emotional engagement and behavioral engagement can now be assessed with the model. Yes, looking at it from the exams part. And then also we're looking at user characteristics and the user grade for engaging in a gamified and can now be factored into the assessment of gamified entrepreneurial courses using the model and student expectations of gamified entrepreneurship courses captured and evaluated as a result of demonstrability, as the resource demonstrability can be factored into it. And then also we look at that the findings provide evidence for contextualizing the application of gamified learning in undergraduate multi-generational courses. Yes. Another bit, yes, research generally is about the new, looking at the new model, which you can get a lot from the paper that we've done. And also the contextualization opens up new and alternative interdisciplinary behavioral models to look and interrogate the field of gamified entrepreneurship education in there. And it extends the knowledge on higher education entrepreneurial courses evaluation and assessment of gamified entrepreneurship courses, and also multi-generational courses, which I don't have a lot of study. In most universities, the generations are virtually separated. But in our particular case, you realize that even people of certain age, 60, 50, others are still in the undergraduate programs. And if you have a cohort of that sort, there's a need to contextualize some of these things that we have to do. These are limitations because it's a unique university. It's a big university that has that's a sort of thing. And then it can be done across cross-sectional. We can follow them if they are to play it in different years of it, but we only use 1 year to look at it. And then the complexity of student engagement, which is very what has been studied very well, both in education and in other areas, to be behavior, and then also for delivering of programs. This is an area that there's special research on that, and it is limited to technology adoption. There's a need to look at it and encourage research into satisfaction and other models, which we've started some studies on. These are areas that can be looked at. These future models would elucidate the nuances of engagement in the relationships with entrepreneurial intention, and also strengthen the literature on intention and then orientation. Okay, generally, these are our conclusions. I mean, some about this. The emerging implications for entrepreneurship education and undergrad activities, courses, and programs as they are increasingly being mediated and delivered with that. And then in practice, to bring to light the nuances and the challenges for course designs and also pedagogic practice, and then to add to the body of knowledge the emphasis of the distinctions in student engagement gamified programs. Okay, I added a few selected references for the study, and thank you very much for listening to my presentation.